Imagine this, an Arctic region without sea ice. Instead of white sheets stretching millions of square kilometers, we have dark open water, absorbing heat, accelerating warming, and leaving polar bears, narwhals, and seals in despair. Painful reality is that the Arctic could face a first virtually ice-free Arctic already within the next decade. But now imagine this. We have the power to regrow that ice. Through innovation and collaboration, we can preserve the Arctic and safeguard our climate. My name is Fonger Ypma. I'm the founder of Arctic Reflections, and I'm here today to discuss an ambitious plan to restore Arctic sea ice just by pumping water from underneath the ice on top of it, accelerate the freezing, and have more ice left in summer. And this is not just a story of hope, this is a call for radical action, grounded in science and data. So how did I end up on this snowmobile, just 1,300 kilometers of the true North Pole? I used to have a typical office job in the energy transition, and this transition is luckily picking up in speed across the world. But I soon realized that even rapid CO2 emission reductions are basically too late already to preserve the Arctic sea ice. So the Arctic really acts as some sort of cooling shield for the Earth, because ice reflects up to 90% of sunlight. But as ice melts, this shield weakens, leaving dark oceans to absorb the heat and accelerate the further melting. Over 75% of sea ice volume in the Arctic has already been lost in the last 40 years. And this is a problem for unique wildlife, such as polar bears and narwhals, and for indigenous communities who crucially depend on the sea ice for their traditional way of living. But it's also a global problem, because an ice-free Arctic could release methane from the thawing permafrost and disrupt ocean currents that regulate temperatures worldwide. So our planet's climate stability is really at stake. So then I wondered, isn't there somehow a way to preserve this Arctic sea ice until the effect of bringing down CO2 emissions globally has come down and the ice becomes fully regenerative by itself again? Couldn't we somehow regrow Arctic sea ice? So the solution is surprisingly simple. Pumping seawater from underneath the ice on top of it in winter when it's like minus 30 degrees Celsius. In this way, the ice freezes faster and creates thicker ice, which in turn means that in the summer, this ice layer can survive longer, reflecting more sunlight and slowing down warming. And here's where the numbers get exciting. For every gigajoule of energy we use to pump, we prevent over 1,000 gigajoules of solar energy being absorbed by the dark ocean. The return on investment in terms of energy is just enormous. And these factors even get better when snow is flooded and refrozen, diminishing its insulating properties and allowing acceleration of the natural ice growth on the bottom of the ice as well. So we're talking about a solution that could potentially significantly slow down Arctic decline without requiring a vast amount of energy. So this idea is, of course, not entirely new. No ideas are. And there's quite some academic literature on it already. In fact, oil companies have been thickening the ice since the 70s to protect their oil drilling rigs from the surrounding sea ice. They created artificial ice islands in this way of up to 10 meters thick. We take that same concept but flip it for the greater good, preserving the Arctic instead of exploiting it. So our ambition is to halt the net summer sea ice loss from one summer to the next, which is about 100,000 square kilometers, or twice the size of the Netherlands, where I live. And while this sounds enormous, especially to a Dutchman like me, every winter there's actually plenty of ice. An area more than 100 times as large is covered with sea ice every winter. So we could be quite strategic on where to thicken it and maintain the summer sea ice cover. And we're not just talking theory here. We've tested this in the field already twice. I went to Cambridge Bay in Canada for a field trip where we talked to our indigenous guides about how the loss of sea ice affects their ability to travel safely. And in April, we went to Svalbard, north of Norway, together with researchers from the University of Delft and UNIS, the local research university, to really gather a wealth of data. Our field test was on the Valunden saltwater lake, connected to a fjord via a small inlet. And we were actually very lucky because only a week later, the weather was already above freezing temperatures, which would have ruined all our experiments. So we created 3 pumping sites and a reference site and did many measurements, taking up to 100 ice cores in total. And next to this, we installed remote monitoring equipment and a time-lapse camera to follow the melting process from our offices and analyze all the data. And over the summer, we analyzed this data, and although, of course, in practice, things always are a bit different than in theory, the results were actually quite positive. Firstly, we thickened the ice with about 25 centimeters, or 10 inches, with only 4 hours of pumping. Secondly, the thickened ice stayed colder than the reference ice and melted at a similar daily rate, so the higher salinity didn't really seem to matter. And what was interesting was that the ice was materially whiter than the reference ice, so it reflected more sunlight, which can be seen here on our time-lapse camera and even from the satellite. And we made a friend during our campaign who later came to visit us at our time-lapse camera, which was quite funny. So these early field tests provide us critical data. And with each iteration, we're refining our methods to validate the positive impact potential and make the process more robust. So there are, of course, many more targeted climate interventions, like Africa's Great Green Wall, a massive reforestation project. And just as with regrowing trees, regrowing ice as a large-scale intervention comes with risks. Therefore, we must proceed carefully. Pumping seawater onto ice might sound simple, but could have unintended consequences. We might disturb marine ecosystems by underwater noise pollution or artificial light. And we will work closely with ecologists to understand and tackle these risks, and with climate scientists to understand the impacts on weather patterns and climate. And most importantly, indigenous communities who are stewards of these areas and right holders must have a say in co-developing this initiative further. So how do we proceed? Step by step, we're trying to validate this ice thickening methodology. This coming winter, we want to repeat our earlier field test on a somewhat larger scale to ensure the robustness of the outcome. We will also use these experiments to really estimate what kind of area we could realistically cover with one pumping site. And in the end, to reach our ambition, we need about 1,000 pumping sites, we think. And of course, we aim to power sustainably when scaling up. We're currently looking at various options for this, like hydrogen, and we're even researching a promising method to harvest the energy from the temperature difference between the water underneath the ice and the air above the ice. If this could work, we could essentially create a passive system with no need for external energy input or the associated logistics. So innovation is never a straight path. It requires constant iterations while keeping the end goal in mind. I strongly believe by just doing hands-on research, new and potentially better ideas will emerge. For instance, what if we could use our technology to limit sea ice export out of the Arctic, which is really substantial, by strengthening natural ice arches that form and break up every year in narrow straits in the Arctic. In this way, we could potentially maintain the sea ice cover with a relatively much smaller intervention. And this could even help protect the biodiversity hotspots that form in the open waters south of these ice arches. Let's be clear, tackling CO2 emissions is the most important priority. But preserving Arctic sea ice and limiting the risk of climate tipping points is also important. And for this, we need global collaboration, open innovation, and even competition. We work together with several leading research institutes and NGOs, and we welcome even more collaboration. We're fully transparent in our research, and we're openly sharing all our field test data to the broader scientific community. Think of it as a space race, but instead of racing to the moon, we're racing to save the Arctic. The need for Arctic ice preservation is really a big neglected problem in tackling the climate crisis. Once we've proven that our simple and relatively cheap solution works, a whole new industry on re-icing will need to emerge. So what can you do? We're currently a small team, and to accelerate, we really need innovators, researchers, philanthropists, governments to come together and work on this challenge. Inaction is no longer an option. By regrowing Arctic ice, we may slow down the effects of global warming on the Arctic, limit the risk of devastating climate feedback loops, and protect critical ecosystems. But we can't do it alone. We need you, your ideas, your determination, your energy. We can be the generation that didn't just watch the Arctic melt away. We can be the generation that will fight to save it. Thank you.